This session is for everyone. It doesn't matter if you are a housewife, a student, a mechanic, a clerk, a nursery worker, a politician, a king, a secretary, a mason, or a carpenter. This message is for you because leadership is not limited to titles or positions. Leadership is about discovering something within you that qualifies you to rise, to influence, and to impact. Today we are talking about how to become a leader. Now, leadership is a very complicated subject, not because it is unreachable, but because it is subtle. Most of the people we call leaders are not truly leaders. And here lies the problem. If you don't know what something is supposed to look like, you won't recognize it when you see it. I just said something very important. If you don't know what a leader is, you will accept substitutes, and you will follow those who pretend rather than those who embody true leadership. That's why I often use the term true leadership. If you read my books, you'll notice I avoid the generic word leadership, because what most people call leadership is simply management of power, control, or influence. In fact, I estimate that nearly 90% of the individuals you call leaders are not true leaders. Many of them are professional manipulators. They wield authority by intimidation, they control by threats, they withhold what you desire to force you into submission. They know how to captivate your emotions with clever words, but that does not make them leaders. True leadership is the complete opposite. Let me explain. Write these thoughts down. True leadership is not about control, it is about service. The one who truly leads seeks not to dominate others, but to serve them. True leadership is not about power, it is about empowerment. A follower of a true leader will never say, that person is powerful. Instead, they will say, that person empowered me. They made me stronger. They made me great. That is the measure of leadership. True leadership is not about manipulation. It is about inspiration. Manipulators twist emotions. Leaders inspire purpose. Inspiration is the highest form of leadership. And true leadership is not about people. It is about purpose. A leader does not go searching for followers. They pursue purpose. And in fulfilling it, people are drawn to them. True leadership is about becoming, not just doing. Many we call leaders are praised for the things they have done, but true leaders are defined by what they have become. And in becoming their authentic selves, they inspire others to discover themselves too. Let me pause and challenge your definition of leadership, because what you believe leadership to be will determine what you follow, what you admire, and what you pursue in your own life. If your definition is wrong, your pursuit will be wrong. That's why our world is full of so many leaders in name, but so few in truth. And here's where the real danger lies. False leadership is destroying our societies. How? By replacing principles with politics, conscience with pleasure, work with shortcuts, knowledge with corruption, and morality with greed. Every failure of leadership in history comes back to these perversions. And unless we redefine leadership according to truth, we will continue to suffer under the weight of counterfeit leaders who pursue power rather than purpose. So today we are going to confront these issues head on. We will expose the leadership that is destroying our world, and we will rediscover the essence of what makes a true leader. This session is not just for presidents, prime ministers, or CEOs. It is for you, because whether you know it or not, there is leadership buried inside you, waiting to be discovered. Now that we have laid the foundation of what true leadership is, let's turn our attention to the kind of leadership that is destroying our world. These principles must be repeated until they take root in your thinking, because every nation, every community, and even every family is suffering from the absence of true leadership. The first form of destructive leadership is politics without principles. Nothing has weakened our nations more than this. When leaders abandon principles, they compromise integrity in order to maintain power. And when integrity is sacrificed, leadership becomes corrupted at its core. Think about it. When your political system produces leaders who are deal makers instead of statesmen, what happens? They no longer lead according to conviction. They lead according to polls, interest groups, or financial backers. They compromise their values to please certain groups. And the moment a leader compromises their principles to satisfy people, they are no longer leading. They are being led. That is why so many of our societies are stuck in cycles of mistrust, division, and decay. The second form of destructive leadership is pleasure without conscience. When leaders seek pleasure at the expense of morality, entire nations are endangered. A leader who cannot govern their private appetites will eventually compromise their public responsibilities. We have seen this countless times. Leaders who appear strong in public, but whose hidden lives are consumed by indulgence, immorality, and lack of discipline. When a leader refuses to sacrifice for the sake of others, their leadership is a threat, not a blessing. The third is wealth without work. This is destroying the fabric of society. Anytime people want reward without effort, gain without contribution, or profit without labor, the community begins to collapse. Think of gambling, lotteries, and quick scheme wealth. It creates a mindset of entitlement rather than diligence. When leaders encourage or embody this kind of thinking, they rob their people of the dignity of work, which is the foundation of sustainable prosperity. The fourth is knowledge without character. Our world is full of brilliant people who use their intelligence for selfish, corrupt, or destructive purposes. The more advanced our technology becomes, the more dangerous it becomes in the hands of those without moral restraint. Knowledge without character produces leaders who exploit systems, evade accountability, and destroy trust. Leadership must never be divorced from integrity. Without character, knowledge becomes a weapon, not a tool. The fifth destructive form is business without morality. Entire economies have collapsed because of this. We all remember how greed and corruption in business triggered financial crises that left millions in poverty. Leaders in business who exploit others for profit, who manipulate markets, or who abuse systems for gain are not leaders. They are destroyers. True business leadership must be guided by fairness, honesty, and moral responsibility. The sixth is science without humanity. Science is a powerful servant but a dangerous master. When scientific advancement is not guided by conscience, it can lead to destruction rather than progress. Think of weapons of mass destruction or medical technologies that devalue human life. Leadership in science must always be anchored in a respect for humanity. Otherwise, progress becomes peril. And the seventh is worship without sacrifice. This may surprise some of you, but it is critical. When leaders claim devotion to God but are unwilling to discipline themselves, when they worship publicly but lack private integrity, their example destroys faith in the community. Worship without self-control, without sacrifice, without humility breeds hypocrisy, and hypocrisy in leadership is deadly. Now pause for a moment and reflect. Do you recognize these patterns in your community, in your workplace, in your government, in your own life? If so, then you understand why our world is in crisis, not because we lack leaders, but because we lack true leaders. True leadership cannot survive without principles, conscience, character, morality, humanity, and sacrifice. These are the non-negotiables. When a leader abandons them, they cease to lead. And when a people tolerate leaders without them, they open the door to destruction. And this is why it is so urgent that you learn to identify these false forms of leadership so that you are not deceived, but more importantly, so that you yourself do not fall into them. Because leadership is not just about pointing out what others are doing wrong. It is about asking, am I living as a true leader in my sphere of influence? Now that we have exposed the false forms of leadership, let us dig deeper into one of the most dangerous distortions: politicians versus leaders. Most of the people we call leaders in politics are not leaders at all. They are politicians. And the tragedy is that many societies confuse the two. You can be a politician without being a leader, and you can be a leader without ever holding political office. The two are not the same. Let me explain. A politician is concerned primarily with the next election. A true leader is concerned with the next generation. A politician thinks in terms of votes, polls, and popularity. A leader thinks in terms of principles, values, and legacy. A politician compromises convictions to stay in power. A leader sacrifices popularity to protect convictions. This is why so many of our governments are unstable, why trust is eroded, and why citizens often feel betrayed. Because politics without principles produces people who are driven by ambition, not vision. And when ambition drives a person, their leadership becomes toxic. Ambition says, what can I gain? Leadership says, what can I give? This is why Dr. Munroe often said, we don't need more politicians, we need more leaders. True leadership is not measured by how many votes you get, but by how many lives you improve. It is not measured by how many promises you make, but by how many principles you keep. Think of it this way. Politicians are managers of power. Leaders are custodians of purpose. Politicians may rise and fall with elections, but leaders influence history long after they are gone. That's why we still speak of people like Moses, Nehemiah, Jesus, Mandela, and Martin Luther King Jr. Not because they held office, but because they led with vision, conviction, and sacrifice. Here's another truth. Politicians look for followers. Leaders produce leaders. This is a critical difference. Politicians depend on the dependency of the people. The more you need them, the more secure their position. But leaders inspire independence. They want you to discover your own strength, your own capacity, your own destiny. Leaders create leaders because their goal is not to be remembered as great, but to raise greatness in others. So let me ask you, which one are you aspiring to be? Are you chasing popularity, approval, or recognition? Or are you pursuing purpose, principles, and vision? One path makes you a politician, the other path makes you a leader. Another major difference is in how they view truth. Politicians bend truth to serve their agenda. Leaders bend their agenda to serve truth. A true leader cannot betray principle for power. If they must choose between losing popularity and losing integrity, they will always choose integrity. That is why true leaders are rare. They are not driven by what is convenient. They are driven by what is right. And this brings us to a crucial point. The world is not suffering because of a lack of politicians. The world is suffering because of a lack of true leaders. If every nation, every business, every church, and every community had leaders instead of politicians, our world would be different. We would have stability instead of corruption, vision instead of confusion, unity instead of division. But here is the good news. Leadership is not reserved for a chosen few. Leadership is inside of you. It is not about position. It is about disposition. It is about discovering the principles of true leadership, living them consistently, and inspiring others to do the same. So in this session, we are not just talking about governments, parliaments, or elections. We are talking about you, your family, your work, your influence, your destiny, because wherever there is a need for direction, there is a need for leadership. And if you don't rise to it, someone else will. The question is, will they be a politician or will they be a true leader? Now let us consider the greatest example of true leadership the world has ever seen, Jesus Christ. Regardless of your background, whether you view him through history, religion, or faith, no one can deny that his leadership has shaped civilization more than any other figure in history. And here is what's remarkable. Jesus never held political office. He never led an army. He never sat on a throne. He never campaigned for votes. Yet 2,000 years later, his influence remains unmatched. That alone should tell us something. True leadership does not require a position. It requires purpose, conviction, and vision. Jesus never once called himself a politician. He never sought titles. He called himself a servant, a shepherd, a teacher, a son. Why? Because he understood that leadership is not about status. It is about service. He said, "The greatest among you will be the servant of all." That was his philosophy of leadership. Notice also that Jesus never sought followers. Instead, people followed him because he pursued purpose. Crowds gathered, not because he asked them to, but because his vision inspired them. That is the essence of leadership. Leaders don't chase followers. Followers are drawn to vision, authenticity, and courage. Here's another critical point. Jesus invested his time not in crowds, but in developing leaders. He focused on 12 men. He spent more energy building their character than building his reputation. Why? Because true leaders do not measure success by the size of their audience, but by the quality of the leaders they produce. And look at the results. Those 12 men, ordinary fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots, became world changers. They carried his vision into every nation, transforming history. That's the power of leadership. You don't need millions to start. You just need to build a few who will multiply. Now, what made Jesus' leadership so unique? He led with vision, principles, and sacrifice. He was uncompromising in his convictions. He never bent truth to gain popularity. In fact, sometimes he deliberately spoke words that drove crowds away because he would rather have a few who understood purpose than many who were chasing benefits. That is leadership. Think of how different this is from our politicians today. Politicians change their message to keep the crowd. Leaders stay true to the message even if the crowd leaves. Jesus was a leader, not a politician. But let's go deeper. Jesus understood that leadership begins within. He modeled self-mastery. He fasted. He prayed. He disciplined his life. He showed that you cannot lead others until you have conquered yourself. Many people want to lead nations, businesses, or churches, but they cannot lead their own appetites, attitudes, or emotions. Jesus taught us that leadership begins with personal discipline. And here is the principle you must never forget. Leadership is not first about ruling others. It is about ruling yourself. If you cannot govern your own thoughts, habits, and desires, you cannot be trusted to govern a community, much less a nation. So as we study the life of Jesus, we learn what true leadership looks like. Leadership is service, not status. Leadership is influence, not control. Leadership is vision, not ambition. Leadership is sacrifice, not self-indulgence. Leadership is about producing leaders, not gathering followers. This is why he remains the greatest leader of all time. And this is why, if you want to understand leadership, you cannot ignore his example. Now the question becomes, how do you and I begin to live out these principles? How do we move from theory to practice, from inspiration to transformation? That is what we will explore in the next part, because leadership must not remain an idea. It must become a lifestyle. We have seen that Jesus represents the purest form of leadership. But now let us turn the lens toward ourselves. Because the truth is, every person in this room, every person reading these words, carries the seed of leadership within them. The problem is not whether you have leadership potential. The problem is whether you have discovered it. Most people live and die without ever uncovering the leader that lies dormant inside. And that, my friend, is the greatest tragedy of life. Not death, but living without discovering who you were meant to be. So let us establish this principle. Leadership begins with self-discovery. Until you know who you are, you cannot know why you are here. And until you understand why you are here, you cannot inspire anyone else to follow you. Think about this. When you meet a person who truly knows themselves, who they are, what they stand for, what they were born to do, you sense it immediately. There is a confidence, a clarity, a sense of direction that inspires you. That is the power of self-discovery. But here is the danger. If you do not discover your true identity, the world will assign you a false one. Society, culture, even well-meaning family members will put labels on you. Housewife, student, mechanic, clerk, janitor, and you will spend your life trapped in those labels, never realizing that you were meant for something far greater. Leadership is not about escaping your current role. It is about bringing vision, excellence, and influence into your current role. A housewife can be a leader. A student can be a leader. A janitor can be a leader. Leadership is not about your title. It is about your mindset. This brings us to the second foundation of leadership, belief. What you believe about yourself determines how you live. If you believe you are insignificant, you will live small. If you believe you have no power, you will never attempt great things. But if you believe you were born with purpose, you will begin to rise above limitations. That is why the greatest battle of leadership is not external, it is internal. It is the battle against doubt, fear, and insecurity. Before you can conquer mountains, you must conquer your mind. Which leads to the third foundation, attitude. Your attitude is more powerful than your environment. Two people can grow up in the same circumstances, poverty, difficulty, rejection, and one rises to greatness while the other sinks into despair. What made the difference? Attitude. A true leader is distinguished not by what happens to them, but by how they respond to what happens. Life is unfair. People will betray you. Systems will resist you. But leadership is the ability to turn obstacles into opportunities. And here is something you must understand. Your attitude is contagious. If you are bitter, you will breed bitterness. If you are hopeful, you will inspire hope. If you live with courage, others will catch courage. Leaders set the emotional climate for everyone around them. Now let me connect these three elements. Self-discovery tells you who you are. Belief convinces you of what you can do. Attitude determines how you will do it. Together, these three foundations form the inner structure of leadership. Without them, you may have power, position, or authority, but you will never have influence. This is why so many people in positions of leadership fail. They were never trained to lead themselves. They confuse titles with identity, power with influence, control with inspiration, and so they oppress instead of empower. But when you discover yourself, believe in your purpose, and shape your attitude, you unlock the kind of leadership that transforms lives. You no longer chase followers. They are drawn to you because they sense authenticity. Let me give you a warning. The world will try to shake your belief and corrupt your attitude. Leaders are constantly tested, not on the outside, but on the inside. When you are overlooked, when you are criticized, when you are betrayed, that is when your attitude matters most. True leaders rise above offense. They refuse to be prisoners of resentment. So I ask you, have you discovered who you are? Have you settled what you believe about yourself? Have you chosen the attitude with which you will face life? Until you answer those questions, you cannot step into the fullness of leadership. But once you do, you will find that leadership is not about striving, it is about becoming. You become a magnet, not because of your title, but because of your transformation. And this brings us to the next stage, understanding how vision and purpose connect with leadership. Because once you know who you are, the next question is, why are you here? And that is what we will explore in the next part. Now that we have laid the foundation of self-discovery, belief, and attitude, we must move into the heart of leadership, vision, and purpose. Because until you know why you exist, leadership remains a theory instead of a reality. Let me say this to you. Leadership is not about people. It is about purpose. Most of us think leadership is about finding followers, but true leadership is about finding a cause so compelling, so urgent, so worthy that people choose to follow you because of it. Purpose is more powerful than position. Purpose is greater than charisma. Purpose is the essence of leadership. You see, when you discover purpose, you stop living for survival and start living for significance. Vision then is the ability to see that purpose clearly. It is the picture of a future that does not yet exist, but must exist because you are willing to sacrifice for it. Let me ask you a question. What wakes you up in the morning? Is it a paycheck? Is it routine, or is it the fire of a vision? Because until you find a vision worth dying for, you are not truly living. Think about every true leader in history, men and women who changed the world. They all had something in common, a vision bigger than themselves. Moses had a vision of freedom. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream of equality. Mother Teresa had a vision of compassion. Jesus declared a vision of a kingdom that would transform the earth. True leaders are consumed by vision. They cannot rest until it is fulfilled. Their passion becomes contagious, and people align themselves, not because they were forced, but because they were inspired. Now, here is the problem with much of our leadership today. We have politicians instead of visionaries. Politicians are obsessed with the next election. Leaders are obsessed with the next generation. That is why so many in power today cannot be called leaders. They are merely position holders. A true leader, however, thinks generationally. They ask, what legacy am I leaving behind? Will my children and their children benefit from my leadership, or will they suffer because of it? This is why principles become so important. Vision without principles is dangerous. Passion without values is destructive. Principles are the moral compass that keeps leadership from becoming tyranny. And let me tell you this, your principles will be tested. Leadership is not proven in comfort. It is proven under pressure. When money is offered to compromise, when power tempts you to cut corners, when popularity lures you away from integrity, that is when true leadership shows itself. Write this down. True leadership is the marriage of vision, passion, and principles. Vision gives direction. Passion provides energy. Principles guard integrity. Without all three, leadership collapses. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a ship. Vision is the destination. Passion is the wind in the sails. But principles are the rudder that keeps the ship from crashing. Without principles, your passion will drive you into destruction. This is why our world is in crisis today. We have brilliant, passionate people, but lacking principles. We have leaders with energy and charisma, but no integrity. And the result is politics without principles, wealth without work, business without morality, knowledge without character, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. These 7 dangers, as Gandhi once described, still plague us today. But here is the hope. You do not need a title to live by vision, passion, and principles. A mother raising her children with purpose is a leader. A student pursuing excellence with integrity is a leader. A carpenter building with honor is a leader. Leadership is not confined to palaces and parliaments. It begins wherever you are when you embrace purpose. So I ask you, what is your vision? What is your passion? What principles will you never compromise? Until you can answer those questions, you are living beneath your potential. But once you can, you step into the rare air of true leadership. And this brings us to our next stage, understanding the difference between politicians and statesmen and why our world desperately needs more statesmen. That is where we will continue in the next part. We have seen that leadership is built on self-discovery, belief, attitude, vision, passion, and principles. Now we must draw a sharp distinction because one of the greatest confusions in our world today is between politicians and true leaders. Listen carefully. Not every politician is a leader, and not every leader is a politician. In fact, many politicians are not leaders at all. They are simply power brokers, deal makers, and manipulators of public opinion. A politician's greatest concern is the next election. A leader's greatest concern is the next generation. That difference is everything. Politicians are obsessed with programs, promises, and popularity. They make pledges to secure votes. We will create more jobs. We will lower taxes. We will give free education. Promises, promises, promises. But promises without purpose are empty. True leaders, on the other hand, don't make promises. They cast vision. They inspire people to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. They are not worried about keeping a seat. They are committed to securing a future. Here's something you must remember. Politicians think in terms of 4 years. Leaders think in terms of 40. Politicians live by polls. Leaders live by principles. Politicians are concerned about survival. Leaders are concerned about legacy. This is why our societies often feel frustrated. We are led by individuals who call themselves leaders, but who behave like short-term managers of power. They compromise convictions to please interest groups. They bend their values to maintain popularity. They trade integrity for influence, and in doing so, they disqualify themselves from true leadership. But let me show you what we really need, statesmen and stateswomen. A statesman is rare. A statesman is not obsessed with re-election, but with the unborn generation. A statesman studies history, feels the weight of destiny, and acts with the future in mind. A statesman asks, what will my grandchildren thank me for? What will history record about my time of influence? What will endure after I'm gone? Think about the difference. A politician wants to be remembered for the offices they held. A statesman wants to be remembered for the lives they changed. A politician's vision dies with their term. A statesman's vision outlives their lifetime. And let me tell you something radical. This applies not only to government, but also to the church, to business, to families. Too many pastors are acting like spiritual politicians, protecting their pulpits instead of empowering their people. Too many CEOs are acting like corporate politicians, chasing quarterly profits instead of building lasting companies. Too many parents are acting like household politicians, concerned with rules instead of legacy. We need leaders who rise above the politician's mindset and embrace the heart of a statesman. How do we do that? By focusing on the 5 elements we outlined earlier: purpose, passion, principles, vision, and people. A statesman is not controlled by polls, pressure, or popularity. They are anchored in purpose. They are consumed by vision. They are guarded by principles. And they are motivated, not by self-interest, but by service. Let me make this personal. When people look at your life, do they see a politician or a statesman? Are you concerned with the next convenience or with the next generation? Are you chasing applause or building legacy? True leadership asks us to rise higher, to live for something that will outlast us, to plant seeds of vision that will grow into trees of influence long after we are gone. This is why leadership training is not optional, it is essential, because without transformation at the level of mindset, we will keep producing politicians who lack principles instead of leaders who shape history. And so, as we prepare for the final part, let us shift our focus from what leadership is not to what it must become. In the last section, we will uncover the ultimate model of leadership and the call for each of us to step into it with courage. We have walked a long journey together, from understanding self-discovery, belief, and attitude, to exploring vision, passion, and principles, and finally to distinguishing between politicians and true statesmen. But now, as we close, let us look at the highest model of leadership and the invitation that is before you. True leadership is not about titles, positions, or power. True leadership is about becoming. It is about discovering your purpose, embodying your vision, and inspiring others to rise into their own greatness. And the ultimate model of this is found in service. The greatest leaders the world has ever known did not come to dominate. They came to serve. They did not oppress people. They empowered people. They did not seek followers. They pursued a cause so compelling that followers came naturally. Here is the paradox of leadership. The higher you go, the lower you must bow. Influence is not measured by how many serve you, but by how many you serve. The test of greatness is not how many people follow you into a room, but how many people leave the room greater because of you. Every one of us, regardless of background, profession, or circumstance, is called to this kind of leadership. Whether you are a housewife raising children, a student shaping your future, a mechanic working with your hands, or a politician making policy, your leadership is not defined by your role, but by your character. And this brings us to the ultimate challenge. What will you do with your leadership potential? You can choose to live small, confined by fear, insecurity, and survival, or you can choose to rise, to embrace your identity, to pursue your purpose, and to lead with vision and principles. The choice is yours. History is not shaped by the majority. It is shaped by the committed minority who dare to live differently. Every great movement, every transformation, every breakthrough was birthed by someone who believed they were born for more. Why not you? Why not now? As we conclude, let me leave you with 5 commitments of a true leader. Discover yourself, know who you are, and settle your identity. Believe in your purpose. Convince yourself that your life carries significance. Shape your attitude. Respond with courage, resilience, and hope. Live by vision and principles. Pursue something bigger than yourself with integrity that cannot be bought. Serve others. Empower people, not control them. Inspire them, not manipulate them. If you live by these commitments, you will rise above the politician's mindset and embrace the heart of a statesman. You will become the kind of leader our world is desperate for. And remember this, leadership is not a destination. It is a journey of becoming. Every day you have the opportunity to lead, not by position, but by example. Not by force, but by inspiration. Not by control, but by service. So I leave you with a challenge. Step into your leadership today. The world is waiting for you. The future is waiting for you. And history is watching. Become the leader you were born to be.